Andrew Harrison. I'm the Director of ESSA. Welcome to this morning's webinar on Best Practice Procurement. The rooms, or those attendees who were listed as joining us, the room's filling up now. I recognise some of the names, so good morning to those. As I said, to those I don't know, I'm Andrew, and I have the honour of running ESSA on a daily basis with our team. Could just the first piece of housekeeping, could people let me know that they can hear the audio? There is a chat box. If people could just type a yes, I can hear you, Andrew. Lisa, thank you very much. So yeah, lovely, Alexandra, thank you very much. So I would suggest, if you're staring at a screen and you can't hear me, it might be that you either need to turn your volume up or just have a little play with your sound settings. So I think from our end, we've tested it and we're okay. Thank you, Pamela. Okay, so this is our second in a semi-regular series of webinars. We did one earlier in the year on Brexit with one of our chief economists that we work with. Today we're going to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour talking about best practice procurement with our ESSA partner, BSA, which is headed up by Matt Roper. BSA have offered a member service for approximately 12 to 16 months now, which is all available via the member resource on the website. With regards to today's sessions, I'm going to hand over to Matt shortly, and for question purposes, if we could have them all at the end, and if we can type them into the chat box, what I'll do, I'll collate them all, and obviously time permitting, we'll go through as many as we can at the end. So do feel free whenever something comes up just to type something in. I'll be moderating that. And yeah, thanks for all joining us. And Matt, I'm gonna hand over to you. So good morning, Matt.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending. Thank you, Andrew, as well, for inviting me to come on this morning and to talk to you all about best practice procurement. We're delighted to be partners of ESSA for support for everybody who are members in relation to procurement and cost reduction. I'll mention a little bit at the end of the slides about what we can do for you as members, but I think what I'll do is crack on and start the presentation. So first and foremost, even though I'm MD of the company, but I'm also a procurement specialist myself. I founded Buying Support Agency about 15 years ago. And my story, why I love purchasing, it's perhaps not exactly something that I would raise at parties. It may not be the most exciting of roles, or people may perceive it not to be exciting, but I do see it as being very exciting. If purchasing or procurement is done effectively, and why I love it so much is that it is a great opportunity for people who do procure to really get a grip of an understanding of not just their business but other businesses and how they operate, because you're essentially an ambassador for your company, as well as needing to talk internally to your own stakeholders, and through doing that you really do get to understand how a business ticks. So from my point of view, having done a business degree, that was fantastic. I then moved on from there to work at Unilever predominantly, PricewaterhouseCoopers, but Unilever was the area where my training ground, if you like, for procurement. I had some fantastic training there, and really I wanted to take that story, that understanding, that knowledge, and pass it through to small, medium-sized businesses who may not have had that particular formalised training in best practice. So that's me. I'll just move on to the slide to say, first question, why is it so important to have procurement and value for money to be working properly within your business? Well, first of all, if you take away staff salaries, it can represent between typically 40 and 60% of total expenditure going through a business. So clearly, from that point of view, it's key for any business. And of course, perhaps unlike sales, every pound you save in procurement, be that in negotiation, in better deals or efficiencies, around procurement processes, every pound you save immediately hits the bottom line and boosts your profit by that amount. From a sales point of view, you have to sell more than £1 to get £1 profit because of the cost of sale. So it really is key to profitability. I see a lot of companies that spend an awful lot of time focusing on sales and marketing, quite rightly, but then they're hemorrhaging cash out the back door and wondering why their profit margins are deteriorating. So it really is critical. But more than that, on a positive note, if you do it right, it can bring innovation, it can bring competitive advantage to your business over your competition, who may not be considering procurement as being a strategic function. So there is a real opportunity to profit more by working with suppliers and bringing real value to your end customers. New product developments can be much more rapid if you have a very streamlined supply chain where you understand your suppliers and you work together in partnership. You can bring product development, the cycle of product development, through much more fast, and again can lead to competitive advantage. If you do it properly, you get less stress, less admin. Again, a lot of purchasing teams I see, they're firefighting. And I think if you can step back and start to plan procurement properly and effectively, you can start to move away from firefighting into a much more effective approach to how you operate procurement. And also knowledge transfer in terms of gathering intelligence, not just innovation, but also other intelligence through the supply chain and potentially sharing it with your customers. That is also going to happen more if you have effective purchasing. I'm now going to talk a little bit about some of the weaknesses that we see in typical businesses. And this cartoon says a lot of it, really, in terms of skill sets within procurement. Again, sadly, a lot of buyers haven't had training. A lot of them haven't necessarily thought that they wanted to be buyers. It's just that they perhaps they got bored doing one other role, and it was suggested they might want to become the buyer. But obviously, if they haven't been properly trained, then they're not going to be as effective. There are other weaknesses as well that we see, and it'll be interesting to reflect perhaps on your own businesses to see whether any of these are perhaps happening within your own teams in relation to purchasing. And I'll just pick a few of these out. And the first one is comfort zone. Again, it's very easy to build loyalties with suppliers, but then perhaps we perhaps don't have enough time to reconsider that cost category for a number of years. And so what happens is that over time, you get to a position where you're not actually getting value anymore from those suppliers because you've sat back and perhaps not challenged them or challenged yourselves. Time and resource is another classic, not having enough time to, if you like, analyze markets or put together strategies around how you're going to manage your supply chains. Lack of market knowledge is another problem. Lack of buying power. I'll talk about this a little bit later on, but again, unless you've got significant buying power, if you're like a FTSE 100, for example, most small and medium-sized companies can never get the best deals out there in the market because they don't have the buying power, they don't have the economies of scale. But we can solve that for you. Limited benchmarking. How do you know you've got best prices? I hear a lot of buyers saying, "Oh yes, we know we've got really good deals because we negotiate hard with the suppliers." But again, if you don't benchmark pricing with other potential suppliers or looking at other sources of market intelligence, then you're going to be not going to be in the best position to really evaluate whether you've got best value. Lack of strategy is another weakness. Not setting targets for cost savings or for example, setting a number of suppliers that you want to work with in the future. So you don't know whether you're improving over time. A lack of supplier performance management is another key weakness I see. So again, how many of your suppliers do you monitor and actually manage in a formal way, so that again you can work together to to improve the performance in the supply chain. Specifications not being challenged. It may be that historically specifications have been set years ago, that person or persons may have moved on, and so perhaps it's just not being challenged because it's always been done a certain way. But there is some opportunities to save money by gain efficiencies by challenging that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Too much focus on unit price. That is a major weakness as I see it. Buying is not just about price, it has to be about value, and that means it's other things like service, quality, increasingly also the environmental impact of what you buy as well. Are you factoring that in when you think about the deals, or are you looking at the lowest price? Irregular reviews, so again, not putting the spotlight on certain cost categories for a period of time. And then order patterns, inefficiency around ordering patterns. So again, panic buying because you're not planning ahead, not looking at forecasts in terms of what's likely to come through. If you don't feed information through to the suppliers in good time, then they're not going to be able to prepare, and so they're going to be challenged when you suddenly pick up the phone and say, we need something yesterday. So again, and equally that adds more cost in the supply chain when you have to panic buy. I'm going to talk mainly about 4 issues that I touched upon a minute ago. First of all, I'm going to talk about procurement strategy. Then I'm going to talk about specifications. I'm going to follow on talking about supplier tactics and how you can counter them. And finally, I'm going to talk about supplier performance. So, procurement strategy. I wonder how many of you have a formal procurement strategy in place, and how many of you share that with everybody within the business from board level down. It's really important that whatever strategy you set as a company in terms of its long-term objectives and goals, that your purchasing, your procurement is in alignment with that. So the suppliers that you select are in alignment both in terms of capability and capacity, so that you are going to be serving your customers and as customer requirements change, your suppliers need to reflect that too. So you need to think about things like the risks in the supply chains, and what risks can you see with regards to your customers that you then need to consider in relation to your procurement strategy. What are your future needs in your business? What kind of resource and capacity and volumes are you going to need? Do you need to buy everything in-house, or can you actually internally make something, for example? So the classic make or buy decisions. Timings, think about timings. Are you actually buying things at the right time? Because in some markets, it's as much about the timing of when you go into the market as it is about how much you're buying. What about the procurement process? Make sure you reflect how you're buying in the strategy, and is that process fit for purpose? Is it efficient, or does it bog you down? Is it too administrative or too bureaucratic? To what extent are you collaborating with the supply chains, and to what extent do you need to do that more as part of your overarching strategy to bring more innovation through to your customers? And how much market analysis are you doing? And I would always recommend that people, first of all, before they set strategies, analyse the marketplaces in which they operate and the supply chains in which they operate too. A couple of graphs and charts now, which I would always consider as a starting point when considering how one builds a strategy from a procurement point of view. So this first one is a chart just listing essentially the different cost categories within the business, how much you're spending in each of those cost categories, how many individual purchase orders on transactions there are within that category in a year, and then just simply to rank them. And one of the obvious conclusions that we can see from this particular chart, and it tends to be the norm, is the classic Pareto 80-20 rule. So when you do this, you will find that the vast majority of spend is coming from a relatively small number of suppliers and cost categories. In terms of transactions, again, that can also be reflected, but not always. And the next chart will show you what I mean by that. So this is this is from a real client where we were breaking down values. So on the left-hand side, the range is the spend or the purchase order, starting from 0 through to over £5,000 per transaction. And we were mapping how many suppliers there are that relate to those transaction values, and a total value, and also just how many transactions there were in each of those different ranges of transaction. And what's, again, often the case is you'll find that the very small values, so in this case 503 transactions out of a total of 1,183, so just under half, came from under £100 worth of transaction value, with 97 suppliers. So that's an awful lot of administration, a lot of bureaucracy. So if I see this, I would start to think about, well, what are you doing about perhaps blanket orders, call-offs, where you can perhaps reduce the number of smaller transaction values in a purchase order? Do you really need 97 suppliers? So is there room for consolidation of suppliers? Every supplier you have in your business means more time, more admin, more invoice management, and you just don't have the time to manage properly all of those suppliers. So it needs to be considered, and this is one way of doing that, a spend analysis. Another tool which I find very useful, which I wonder whether you have seen before, this is called a CRI-check model. It's essentially a quadrant analysis where you're considering, from a supply chain point of view, the risk to your business and also its relative strategic importance or profit impact, if you like. So what this quadrant, and what I would tend to say is, if you can start to map your suppliers across these 4 different quadrants, so for example in the routine area, or having low value, low profit impact, or you're not spending a lot of money in that area, and it's also got a relatively low supply risk. So things like stationery, for example, routine costs would go into this box. In all those supply areas where there is deemed to be routine, we would always recommend that you make those purchasing transactions as efficient as possible, because they're not adding value, and you need to be spending as little time as possible on the routine. The bottleneck, again, low value but high supply risk. This is where there's perhaps a small or minimal number of suppliers that can provide that particular product or service, but it is not of a high value. We would always recommend considering ways to protect supply, perhaps stock building, for example, or trying to work with suppliers to gain security in that supply line because of the risk. In terms of leverage, high value, low risk, that's where you want to encourage as much competition as possible, so that you can drive cost out. So you're using your leverage, your buying power, to get as better value as you can. And I think the most important category is strategic, the top right box, with high value, high risk. This is where you need to be building partnerships with suppliers to bring value and innovation through. I would always recommend, if you're spending time in buying, that you try to migrate as much as you can in terms of amount of resourcing to strategic, because that is where the value add is. So it's just quite a helpful little tool there to manage all the cost categories. So the first of the 4 key areas I want to talk about is specifications. So you can get it, people can buy cheap, but they may well regret it if it isn't up to specification. So make sure your specifications are really clear and unambiguous. Otherwise, what may well happen is suppliers will make their own decisions based on their own view as to what you actually want, and that's where misunderstandings can occur and the wrong product or service is delivered. And it's up to you to work with the suppliers to clarify if necessary before you place that order. Try to think about what's critically important as opposed to a nice to have in relation to your specifications, and make sure that the suppliers understand that, again, so that they can prioritize and therefore, again, as part of the negotiation as well, they understand what is negotiable and what isn't. And decide what criteria by which you're going to evaluate the specifications by. Is it price? Is it time? How long it's going to take to adapt the specifications? You need to think about that as part of the development of the specifications. And as per my previous comment, always seek to review specifications. Don't let them sit on a shelf and historically assume that just because a specification was appropriate 5 years ago, that it's appropriate now, because technology may well have improved. Clients may want different things. So it's always good to reevaluate them periodically with your supply chains. Things to consider as well in relation to specifications. Think about the desired outcome. What do you actually want the product or service to deliver? That's the most important thing. Talk to your customers. What do they actually want? So again, don't second guess what you think they want. Talk to them. Think about how you might bring innovation through the specifications. Think about also your company policies. So if you've got policies that relate to ethics and environmental matters, how's that going to be incorporated, for example, within the specifications? And don't necessarily think about brands when you're specifying, because you may be narrowing the market and the range of products available. So think about the whole market, not just necessarily brands within a market. And also ask the suppliers what's possible. You know, they are, after all, the people that know that product or service inside and out. But just be careful that they don't try and sell add-ons that you don't actually need. That's the most important reason why you need to be clear on your specifications, ideally before you approach the suppliers, so that you don't get hoodwinked into adding other value adds that actually aren't required. Now let's consider supplier tactics, and I'm going to put to you 3 classic supplier tactics which we should be thinking about being aware of and countering as professional buyers. The first one is price lists. So I'm sure you all get price lists sent to you by suppliers. Why are people sending out price lists? Well, one of the reasons is to legitimize that request for price in the first place. When it's written down, psychologically, people can, in a sense, be more locked into and hooked into those prices as the way it is. But it's worth asking some questions. The price list may look very glossy and professional, but it doesn't need to be set in stone. Is it what others are paying, or is it just set for you? It's worth asking questions and challenging the concept. What are the actual prices? And what are the costs? Never mind the price list. What are the total costs of acquiring that product or service? Because obviously price is just one aspect of the total cost. So it's worth identifying that, not just focusing on the price list. A second tactic is to offer volume discounts. Buy one, get one free, or the bog off, if you like. In other words, as the supplier will be saying, spend more and you'll pay less. What they're doing here is to get their logic in first. They set the threshold, so they're in the driving seat to encourage you to buy more. The problem is with that is that the price breaks, for example, may not be set up according to your actual requirements. The thresholds for discounts may just be out of reach, funnily enough. I don't want to be cynical here, but you know, these things do happen. So this discount that they may be offering you may never happen. So don't be hoodwinked into that. Start thinking about what your actual volumes are, or the likely future volumes are. And also, I would also request or require that the extra discount isn't just on that element of the spend which is above the threshold, but actually applies to the whole spend. So this is, again, something that will be good to challenge and negotiate. In other words, don't just leave it to the suppliers to dictate the price and the terms. Another tactic is what I call the dripping tap. So I'm sure you've seen this before, where sales reps come in and they start dropping into conversations the fact that there could well be price increases coming through in the next few weeks and months. They may not go into a lot of depth at that stage, but they're just a little drip, like a dripping tap over time, using logic to justify the comments. They don't necessarily ask and demand for price increases there and then. They're just leaving you with that little bit of information, and they'll probably repeat that a few times. Later on down the line, they may well request that increase, but actually potentially they may ask for a smaller increase than was initially suggested in the meetings prior to that. And of course, human nature being as it is, many buyers express a degree of relief. Thank goodness that it wasn't as high as you first said. Thank goodness for that, and then they pay up. This very likely can be a strategy on the part of the suppliers. So again, just be aware of these strategies. So you can counter these tactics by, for example, suggesting the price you're willing to pay, understanding your budgets, and also what your total cost is going to be, not just the price. Benchmark, look at what your requirements are and see how price compares in catalogues and other sources of price, so that you can validate whether prices going up are across the whole industry or just on the individual supplier point of view. Try and find out as well, as much as you can, whether there are any hidden costs which the supplier hasn't come clean with up front. They may give you price lists, but what else is going to go up? What about the transport costs, for example? Are they included? Look at the small print. Don't be afraid. In fact, I would actually say I would always recommend that you ask for a price breakdown so that you can start to identify the separate elements of cost, not just accept their total price. The more information you can gather around price based on the small elements of that total cost, the better prepared you'll be for negotiations when suppliers come knocking asking for price increases in the future. And I would always aim to log those price breakdown information somewhere centrally so that others in your team can understand in the future, from an intelligence point of view, what the suppliers have said previously. The fourth area is managing supplier performance. This is a real key area. This is how you're going to sort out problems with performance, is to measure it, to monitor it, and to be clear on your expectations. Particularly if it's a medium to long-term product or service offering, you need to build in KPIs, service level agreements, into the contracts. You need to be clear what your minimum accepted performance levels are, and then what the consequences are if they're not met. That might be a penalty clause, or actually you could, what I think can work very well is an incentive, rather than using just the stick approach. What about offering a carrot? If they do perform to an agreed level, or perhaps outperform, if you like, based on your agreed key performance indicators, give them a bonus or share savings with them, or what have you. But do think about that. You must hold them to account for any supply chain issues, even subcontractors not being paid on time, for example. Always review and manage your service delivery risks with the key suppliers. And whenever you're sitting down with your core suppliers, you need to be discussing the supplier performance and looking at the target set and how actual delivery and quality performance has matched up with those targets. And do also think, particularly for larger contracts, whether you've got business continuity and disaster recovery plans built in, because if something goes horribly wrong and you don't have a disaster recovery plan or business continuity, then in panic mode you may not make the right call. Whereas if you can put these plans in place with suppliers when there aren't any problems, then everybody's going to be clear what to do, and you can act much more speedily when things go wrong. So some final kind of top tips, just to think about, some kind of buzzwords, if you like, which summarize in total some of the areas which you need to be thinking about to improve your procurement practice. Partnerships. Increasingly, remember that strategic box in the quadrant analysis. Partnerships is the way you're going to get competitive advantage and innovation. Rationalize. Are you using too many suppliers? Think about the administrative cost of all those different suppliers. Don't get into your comfort zone. Aggregate so that you can get as much buying power as possible, as much leverage as possible with the suppliers. Set key performance indicators and service level agreements. Put them into your contracts and then show that you're actually genuinely key to monitor them, and that it's a key part of working with you, with your suppliers, so they understand the penalties of not complying. Think of cost modeling. So in other words, try to work out, get these price breakdowns so that you can start to understand the different elements of cost. You're going to be in a much better position when you negotiate if you've got a better handle of that. Contingency and risk management, which I've just mentioned, do build that into your strategies and your plans, your contracts as well. Think total cost, not unit price. Think about service, quality, the environmental impact. Don't just fixate on unit price. And where are the hidden costs too? Remember to negotiate. Never give away anything without the suppliers having to give you something in return. And finally, outsource. The vast majority of companies in the UK have not even considered the opportunity for outsourcing elements of their procurement so that they can focus on the more critical, the higher value, higher risk areas of their supply chain. And again, when I mentioned earlier, remember that routine quadrant box that I mentioned? Buying groups are perfect for that area because, as I said, every minute you're spending on those routine costs, you could be spending on areas that are much more valuable and profitable for you. So why do it yourself? There are other organisations like ourselves who can do that for you and bring the buying power that you may not have too. So that's the end of the majority of these slides around best practice. I do want to just spend a couple of minutes only on who we are. As Andrew said at the beginning of this presentation, we are here to support ESSA members like you. So we were set up 15 years ago. We're a team of 8 of us. We are all best practice procurement specialists with a mission to create amazing value for clients and society through the power of supply chain. So ultimately, our focus is working with you to ensure you get not just prices down, but value gain as well across the whole of the supply chain, and also how you operate your procurement function in terms of internal processes as well. We work with some very well-known clients. Some of these are here. To be honest, whilst it's all well and good talking about trophy clients, if you like, the vast majority of our clients are not well known. They're small and medium-sized clients, but we have worked with some very large companies as well, both in the public and private and charity sectors. A summary of what we can do. So we can do health checks. So we can spend a couple of days working with you on site, interviewing both directors and operational teams, looking at documentation, even doing interviews with certain suppliers to get their view on you, looking at your processes and procedures, how you tender, how you manage contracts, how you manage suppliers and performance. So we can do a risk assessment, but not only can we do an analysis on how you are now, we also put together an action plan, a blueprint, if you like, with priorities so that you can make your purchasing as good as it can be. So that's a health check. We can do particular consultancy work. We can outsource for you, so we can We can be your buyer on a part-time basis, on an interim basis, so that we can focus on that if that's not your core strength. And we can also do training and coaching in-house, so we can come and coach your buyers so that they have their skills are much more appropriately set to get best value. And so if you want to talk to us at any stage about this, any of these, then please do get in touch or talk to Andrew, and he can obviously tell us about you, and we'll talk to you about any of these areas. And also sustainable procurement, i.e. making sure that you support the environment, we can also support. We also have BSA Buying Group, which can be seen as a completely standalone service, or it can be used to offset our fees in doing the health check or the training or the outsourcing. Or you could, as I said, or you can just focus on getting some quick wins. So with ESSA, we've negotiated such that there is no cost at all to you taking any number of these cost categories. They're all classic overheads, and you may not have all of these costs to bear, but most of you will have most of these categories. And we can essentially go out and tender for you and benchmark your existing prices and come back transparently with using our supply chain partners with significant cost down, up to 35, even more % cost down, because we've got many hundreds of clients, and the buying power we have, the combined buying power, means that we can deliver some serious savings. Our biggest single cost categories are things like gas, electricity, telecoms, which is mobiles, landlines, broadband, stationary office supplies. We also do a lot of work in relation to things like photocopiers, credit card processing, cleaning supplies, parcel, courier services. So do have another look, and I'll be delighted to talk to you without any obligation after this webinar is finished about this service. It would normally cost £1,068 plus VAT per year to join BSA Buying Group, but we've negotiated it, we've waived that completely, so you don't pay us a penny for you to use the buying group. We do charge the suppliers that we've carefully handpicked and vetted and continually monitor. We do charge them a small fee for the privilege of them being in our buying group, but as I said, you can tap into this for free. So it really is a no-brainer, and it frees up your buyers to focus on the more critical spends. So up to 35% cost saving frees up your buyers to concentrate on more critical areas. As I said, completely free to use. All the suppliers are vetted for best value. You keep complete control operationally over the suppliers, so we don't get involved in the day-to-day deliveries. We don't get involved in the payments. You would have a normal relationship with the suppliers. However, we do want to get feedback from all of our members about the ongoing performance of the suppliers that we introduce. So again, it's working with you to make sure that you get best value. We don't take a slice of the savings from the savings we deliver. We don't come to you and ask for a slice of the savings. You keep 100% of the savings from day one. The only exception to that being business rate reviews and also R&D tax credits. But other than that, all the others we don't take any of the savings. How it works is you simply send 3 months copy bills, the most recent scanned copy bills. Most 95% of our clients or prospects now scan and email them through. We then conduct a competitive tender on an individual member basis, or for things like insurance or the financial service products we have, because we're not authorised or regulated by the FCA, we essentially introduce them to you and they do the work. But ultimately, the whole project is about getting you identified to you best value. The winning suppliers are invited to meet with you without any obligation. Once you start trading, we will then monitor the supply performance with your feedback being key. Finally, I mentioned we have a sustainable procurement support service. That is called greenbuying.co.uk. It's Best of British. It's a website selling best of British eco supplies and services. So it's things like recycling bins, non-toxic cleaning supplies, eco-stationery, and we've also got 100% renewable energy and biogas, green gas, we also have that too, and ethical telecoms. So it's all about identifying and sourcing in one eco shop, if you like, environmentally supported products and services. So do take a look at greenbuying.co.uk. And that's it. Thank you for your time. It's now 10:41. I hope you've valued that. Any questions?
Yeah, we have got some questions, Matt. Thank you very much. Can you hear me, Matt?
I can. Yes, I can.
Good. Okay, we've got a couple of questions coming in. So Ken has asked. So I think we one of the slides showed some of the categories available via BSA Group. Are there any other categories apart from that? Can our members get in touch with you to discuss areas within their own business procurement, which may be special to their group of companies, their sector?
So the buying group is aimed at the classic indirects, the cost that every company has to bear. Because these tend to be more commoditized, we can use economies of scale much more straightforwardly to deliver the value. If a member wants us to look at more specialist areas of cost that perhaps are unique to them, then that would possibly depend on what it is. I think we just want to have a conversation to find out what it is. We can't be experts in every single supply line, every single marketplace. So if it's a direct cost that's that's core to your business, then you probably have more knowledge of the supply chains than we will have. Obviously, we can impart knowledge around how one can negotiate, how one can tender, the generic skills around procurement. But we can certainly have a conversation. What we may not be able to bring, of course, though, is economies of scale in a particular specialist area. But we can. One aspect we can deliver, for example, is to come in on a few days a month, which is very flexible, and we can actually put tenders together specifically for you. So we can do that. That will be a fee-based service. If sufficient members want to work with us to put together frameworks for other routine indirect costs, which perhaps aren't listed here, then we can certainly look at it as well. But I think the first thing is, rather than second guess, talk to us, and we can always have that discussion.
Thanks, Matt. Another question from Tom. So going back to the matrix, have you got any more examples that you could provide to highlight the sort of categories that are high risk and high value?
Yeah, so the core areas of your spend, and by core I mean the products and services that you require to deliver your service. So it's not the indirect overheads, which are what I call the necessary evils. It's the core supply chains that you work with, or the subcontractors you work with. And that could be recruitment agencies, or it could be particular kits that you buy in for to take out to exhibitions, for example. That may be for you strategic because you've got high value and you've got high risk. So it really depends on how many suppliers there are, for example, how competitive it is, and how much leverage you have with those suppliers. That will then determine which of these quadrants it goes in. So, as I said, strategic tends to be, literally any supplier where you're spending relatively a lot of money, where there's a high impact on profits, and where there is a big risk to your customer base if they let you down. So, which is why you need to be spending more time in those areas. So it's difficult to specify exactly without knowing your organisation which examples might go into these boxes. Again, when we do a health check, we can work with you to do just this. But as I said, the routine areas would be all the overheads like stationery, print, workwear, gas, electricity. That they would be the routine areas because you've got lots of suppliers and you're not spending huge amounts of money in that area.
And let's say keep them coming, guys. We've got a few more minutes. So Pamela's asked, recently we have had several problems with quotes and visuals provided by suppliers not matching and visuals displaying increased spec than the quote, a strategy to get you to up your spec. But this then wastes time in the procurement process. Do you have any tips to prevent this?
Well, in my presentation, I was talking about getting real clarity in terms of what you actually want. The clearer you can be, then the less ambiguity there will be and the less risk you'll run of the suppliers adding more bells and whistles than you actually need. It may well be for certain spends that you, particularly if you've never bought something before, that you're not completely clued up as to what the specification ought to be. I would always recommend you do some market research beforehand as part of the specification development. But inevitably there will be times when you'll need to have open discussions with potential suppliers or existing suppliers around the development of the specification. So there may well be times when you do have to trust the suppliers because they are experts in that particular area. But I would always ask the questions of yourselves, do we actually need it? What value are we bringing to our customers by accepting perceived additional bells and whistles that we perhaps hadn't specified originally? So just challenge. Don't assume that the suppliers are always giving you precisely what you want for any other reason to want to add margin and profit and to upsell. Obviously, they're running a risk if they do that, because if they get found out, then they're going to lose your business. But it does happen lots of times, so I would always challenge that. And if you're not finding that they're being cooperative or they're being perhaps evasive, then I would look at other alternative suppliers, people who are prepared to be to be open and transparent, and fundamentally want to give you what you actually want.
Thanks, Matt. I think, oh, here we go, Lisa. Hello, Lisa. Not from me, however, thank you for a great presentation. Oh, it wasn't a question, it was just saying thank you very much, Matt.
So just going back to my final slide then, there's my phone, there's the phone number and the website. Please do have a look at our website, give us a call, we'd be delighted to help.
Like I say, just from me, a little bit of final housekeeping. I think for me, one of the biggest things is, especially historical for me, is the comfort factor. I think quite often, sometimes, if there has been a lack of planning for one reason or another, you can go to the path of least resistance, and you fall back into the supplier comfort zone, people you've used before, without necessarily interrogating that supply chain. But I think that's lots of food for thought. I really appreciate it, Matt. A great presentation. As I've said, all this information will be made available to you. The session has been recorded, so it will be sent out again. But there's obviously the links and the telephone number here direct to Matt via the ESSA member login, so essa.uk.com. If you haven't got your member login details for that, you'll need to retrieve them from us. Do get in touch, and you'll be able to log in. You'll be able to find the buying area from BSA, and you'll be able to find all the other various member benefits that we have listed there. If any of you, Matt will be joining us again in the future for another webinar. Like I said, this is something we do on a semi-regular basis. Generally, they're led by member inquiries. So if there is something within your company or within your role specifically that you'd be interested in having a guest speaker on. These webinars, they work for some, they don't work for all, but you know, we tend to get groups of between 10 and 20 people taking part, which is actually quite good for these sessions. And so if you have anything else that you'd like us to get a guest in on, or even Matt being a procurement specialist, if there's something else that you might be able to suggest, and we can go forward with that. But I think that's it from ESSA HQ in Hertfordshire and BSA in Gloucestershire. The power of the internet bringing us together this morning. Yeah, everyone have a good day, and thank you very much for coming along. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.